Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your hosts Jake and Scott. In this week's episode, we head to downtown Louisville, Kentucky to the Evan Williams Experience to catch up with two great gentlemen, Adam Edwards and Bernie Lubbers, who know all things about bottled and bond whiskey. So that's what we're going to talk about today, especially what Heaven Hill does with that in particular. So sit back and buckle into the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Adam, Bernie, thanks for having us. And Adam, thanks for being here for the third time with the third brand. So stay in one place for one time.
You got it. You got it. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Well, Bernie, long time coming. You know, we've talked to you on and off several different times, whether at a liquor barn class or Scott ran into you at a dinner for bottled and bond bourbon not too long ago, and finally glad to have you on. Adam, you're basically family at this point, so no need for extra introductions or pleasantries there. But man, excited to catch up with you, Adam. You know, we got 3 weeks into the job.
I believe this is week 5. Actually, I think we're on 5 weeks right now, and it's we were kind of joking when you got here. My job right now is just to hang out with Bernie. I don't know if I could have a better job description, and I think your clap back of that is hilarious. Is now it's Bernie's downfall. He has to hang out with me for 5 weeks.
It's been fun.
Yeah. So Bernie, you get to do this. You've done this for a long time, it seems like, and you get to talk a lot about bottled and bond bourbon, and you kind of are the flag bearer. It's tatted on you, and you are the professor, the whiskey professor. So can you tell the listeners what bottled and bond means?
Sure. Bottled and bond is a classification that you have to achieve that the United States government puts down in their standards of identity. So if you think of these standards, I always tell people to think of military men and women earning medals. There's certain words on labels that mean things by law. Mm-hmm. So the words Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, those are all individual medals you have to earn. We're if you take them backwards, whiskey is the class of spirits. So you've got to be, made from grains. You got to be distilled at less than up to 190 proof. You got to be aged in oak. It's got to look, smell, and taste like whiskey too. So that's a classification. If you meet those, so that means it can't be rum. Rum's made from molasses and sugar cane, so that it's out because of grains. Maybe it could be vodka. It almost kind of describes vodka, except it's aged in oak. Yeah. So there's little nuances, but they all mean something. So you're in the whiskey medal. Then bourbon. So you got to, it's not just from grains. It's a specific percentage. So it's at least 51% corn to be bourbon, and then it's got to be distilled less than 160 proof. So it's different than whiskey. It's got to be aged in brand new charred oak, and that's the difference. It can be stored at no more than 125 proof. So you hear all these standards. Mm-hmm. So you've got to earn that medal. If it's a corn whiskey, it's got to be at least 80% corn. And if it's aged, that's the only whiskey I know that doesn't have to be aged. But if you age it, it must be in a brand new, uncharred, or a used barrel. Same classification, off the still less than 160, in the barrel no more than 125. And then you can be corn whiskey. If you're rye whiskey, that's 51% rye, so you got to earn that medal. So then straight is a age statement. It means it must be aged in the appropriate types of barrels, whether it's used for corn whiskey or brand new for rye or corn bourbon, and that is 2 years. So it's straight means 2 years. Okay, that's pretty cool. And then Kentucky is the state of distillation. You can make bourbon anywhere in the United States and the District of Columbia and the protectorates, right? So you must put that. That means something. I mean, Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, first of all, we have the heritage, we have the experience, we have the water, we have, we're in the middle of the country, so we get cold winters and warm summers, so it's different than Texas Straight Whiskey, it's different than North Dakota Straight Whiskey, it's different than Florida Straight Whiskey. It's all good whiskey, but that does mean something, so that's another medal. But if it says bottle and bond on it, not only does it have to pass all those, it has to, individually, and then it has to pass another set of standards. So to be bottled and bond, it must be from one distillery, from one class of materials. It has to come from the same distilling season, which is a 6-month period. The first half of the year is the spring, and the second half of the year is the fall season. So it's a finite number of barrels you can make in a 6-month period. Mm. So that shrinks you down to a more thin air. then it must be stored for not just 2 years but 4 years
Yeah.
in the appropriate types of containers. So it's a higher level of achievement. Must be reduced in proof to exactly 100 degrees of proof. I forgot to tell you that whiskey is 80 proof or higher. Right? But bottle and bond's exactly 100 proof, not 99, not 101, not 99.9, but exactly 100, which is also a proof gallon. That's what the government cares about, is their taxes, right? And then it must bear the real name of the distillery or the trade name, so it can still be confusing. But to clear that up, you also must put your distilled spirits plant number that the federal government assigns you. And so a DSP stands for Distilled Spirits Plant. Then we're in Kentucky, so it's DSP KY. And at Heaven Hill, we're number 1 because we're the best. It just happens to be our number. Mr. Bernheim's number. And then if you bottle it at a separate plant, it must be even put on there. So that's DSP KY 31, our bottling plant, and where our new distillery is going to be, the Heaven Hill Springs. So hear all those?
Yeah.
So I call Bottle and Bond the Green Beret or the Navy SEAL of spirits. It's got all. It's got all the medals. Why would you want every single Bottle and Bond? If you're going to start your bourbon collection or your bunker, just go out and buy every Bottle and Bond and then branch out from there. If you're going to start a whiskey bar, buy every Bottle and Bond and branch out from there. If you don't have those, and Bottle and Bond are the rarest and most restricted spirits on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Period. Stop.
So, it sounds like a sales pitch, but I wholeheartedly agree.
I mean, you know, it can be used in a variety of different ways, right? From a craft distillation, it means we've gotten here. For you all, it's to carry on legacy heritage of all the brands that you all own and create. And so I think it has different meanings and purposes for a variety of different people. And we've said it for a long period of time. A lot of people are all after the give me the burn off your face proof of whiskey, but there's something about 100 proof bourbon or 100 proof rye whiskey that allows you to kind of see that true spirit from start to finish that we both really enjoy.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is the preferred class. You know, Bottle and Bond is the preferred spirits of your cocktail bars from around the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a high enough proof that it pokes its head through, and it's not overproofed because it complements the ingredients of whatever cocktail. So if I'm going to make a Manhattan, and I make one with Rittenhouse Rye and one with Evan Williams Bottle and Bond, they're both made with the same 3 ingredients: corn, rye, and barley. Both aged for 4 years. Right? Mm-hmm. Both 100 proof. But if I made one of those, if I made the Rye Manhattan with a 3-year-old 80 proof, and I made another one with a 4-year-old 86 proof bourbon, and one with a rye, one with bourbon, you might not be able to tell which one's rye and bourbon.
Yeah.
Because those ingredients, that sweet vermouth and the ice that turns into water, it might dissipate in that cocktail. But if it's 100 proof, it's going to poke its head up, and the Rittenhouse Rye one's going to hold its hand up and say, "I'm the rye one," and the Evan Williams is going to go, "I'm the bourbon one over here." So it really comes into play when it comes to making cocktails, whether you're making cocktails at home, as we were talking about earlier, or you're out.
Yeah.
I think even for like the consumer that's looking at a shelf now, which we all know that it can be overwhelming to just walk into a store and you just kind of stare for a while and see what's new and kind of get confused. But I think it's super important for a consumer because it's all on the label.
Yeah.
Like it's all there.
It's total transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Some people say, "Well, is this sourced?" And that's fine if it's sourced, you know. But with Bottle and Bond, you don't have to wonder.
Well, you don't have to wonder where the source is. You know the source,
You
right?
know the source.
And I think that's what's unique about it, and it carries such a weight. And I think the way you frame that, the Green Beret, the Navy SEAL of it all, you know, it means it's gone through that process, which is important. And I think for what's really interesting is for you all, a heritage brand and one of the larger bourbon producers to kind of carry that flag for Bottled and Bond, I think is really important. And so I've never had this conversation with Max, and I don't know if you have either, but you know, you've probably had this conversation. Why is Bottled and Bond so important to Heaven Hill?
Well, Heaven Hill, first of all, as you said, for heritage, or I call it a legacy distillery. So there's only, so go back to the beginning of what I know, because I started in 2005. So that's all I can speak to when it comes to like, that's where I started. So 2005, that's not that long ago.
Yeah.
20 years ago. Guess how many distilleries were in Kentucky?
6 or 7, wasn't it?
And say like 8.
There were 10 distilleries owned by 6 different companies.
Okay.
Because Jim Beam has the Booker No plant, and then Claremont,
Yep.
and then Sazerac has 2,
Yep.
right? And Heaven Hill has 1, and that. So you have 10 different distilleries owned by 6 different companies. So those 6 companies are legacy distilleries.
Yeah.
There will never be more than 6. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was 2 distilleries outside of Kentucky. Now I'm talking bourbon. Of course, there was Dickel and there was Jack in Tennessee. So you can count them as obviously part of the industry. I'm talking strict bourbon though. And you had Virginia Gentleman, Smith Bowman in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
You had MGP in Indiana, which wasn't even making bourbon in 2005, I don't think. But so and Smith Bowman's part of Sazerac. So still just 6.
Yeah.
So it's important just to carry on the legacy. If it wasn't for these 6 companies, we would not have 3 million people coming to Kentucky to visit the visitor centers.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be here. So we owe the legacy, all the legacy distilleries, 6 of them, a little bit of thank you, for keeping this alive. Max and his dad Ed and Kate and Alan and the family, they continue to keep the legacy alive and keeping these historic brands like Old Fitzgerald, which was always bottle and bond, alive and well.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing back Heaven Hill as a bottle and bond as a national product is important to the company. Keeping brands like Rittenhouse Rye, which was an acquisition for us, and Mellow Corn, which came from the Medley Distillery in Owensboro. These are historic labels, and as you notice, we don't change those historic labels. We keep Old Fitzgerald label looking like it did in 1955 or whatever, that crystal decanter. So we take a lot of pride into keeping these historic brands alive, and we launch our own brands too.
Yeah.
But Henry McKenna was an acquisition, And why were these labels around? How do we get a hold of those? Who's going to let those gems go?
Well, all the distilleries that were open during Prohibition closed, right? And so now you have a variety of labels or producers that had distilleries that are now defunct. And how can you keep telling the story of Kentucky bourbon if you can't tell it prior to Prohibition, which is very important.
So I've been teaching Adam just how I think and how I look at things too, and I'm learning from him too. He's got a younger, fresher set of eyes, and he looks at things different. So I always like to have him talk and present too, because I learn. But I've been talking about after Prohibition was over, why was bottle and bond so important right when it came back after Prohibition? It was the industry standard of what people saw as the good stuff.
Yeah.
Because it was the only bourbon you could get legally with a doctor's prescription during Prohibition. That was 14 years. So the only thing you could get, and it said under the supervision of the United States government, it's back when people trusted the government. It was a very long time. But, so before Prohibition, it was known as the good stuff because it was purity law, only pure water. It was guaranteed a good age, purity, age, and strength of 100 proof. So those 3 things, this is 1897 when it was passed. So from 1897, it took years and years for people to learn what it was and advertising. Then they had the Pure Food and Drug Act and all that stuff. And then Prohibition, but still bottle and bond.
Yeah.
And then after, what are you going to try to bring back? Well, it's going to be bottle and bond.
For sure. Because
that's what you want. That's what customers want. But bottle and bond takes 4 years to age.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we had to give our competition 4 years. And we never got back. It never came back.
Yeah.
Now, Heaven Hill did well, but Heaven Hill made Heaven Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Little bitty distilleries in Kentucky made one thing, and they made pretty much one brand, and they made it. Ancient Age made Ancient Age, right?
Yeah.
So, but it was these larger companies that owned and distributed the Johnny Walkers and the Dewars and the Cuddy Sarks and the Canadian Club and the VO. So there was 4 major companies called the Big 4. We had the big 3 automakers.
Yeah.
The big 4 spirits companies. And you had National, that was Old Crow, Old Granddad, Old Overholt, all the olds.
Yeah.
Things like that. And then you had Canadian club was Hiram Walker, so Hiram Walker. You had Seagram's, which was a powerhouse. Sam and Edgar Bronfman. They had VO, and then of course they were able to put a classification of American blended whiskey, and you wouldn't have to age it as longer. So that's Seagram's 7 and Seagram's 5 blend back then. So that and those were all lighter, used barrels, used cooperage, and then you had Shenley, which was Stag and Ancient Age and all that. I mentioned Ancient Age, but it was under the Shenley brand, and they had Stag and Old Rippy and all that kind of stuff. Old Charter. And when bourbon never came back, well, in the 60s, you had the 3 martini lunch.
Yeah.
That's gin. And that's 80s, 90 proof or whatever,
Yeah.
Then you had vodka with the Moscow Mule, and tequila with the Margarita and the Daisy,
Yeah.
And then you had rum, which is the Cuba Libre and all that. So it was clear spirits. So the big four is like, well, they're our stockholders. Own us. Why do we have all these great bourbons? So they sold them off.
Yeah.
So that's when Max and his dad Ed, they started acquiring. So we were always family owned. They owned department stores too. This was a side hustle, right? This is like them driving Lyft or Uber back then, right? They always played the long game with Heaven Hill Distillery.
Yeah.
They wanted to do it right, not make short-term decisions, to a thing. And that's what the Big Four did.
Yeah.
They got rid of all those gems, crown jewels of the bourbon world.
Yeah.
And that's why you have Beam that acquired the Old Crow and the Old Granddad and the Old Overholts, and you had Sazerac acquire a lot of those. These are people who were, at that were family owned, and they had the experience and the passion, and they're going to keep those historic brands the same.
Yeah.
And that's why Heaven Hill has always looked at those historic brands and say, not going to change that Mellor Corn label.
Yeah.
Since 1945, it's been the same.
Well, and it's one of the most eye-catching labels, and Adam was rocking Mellow Corn to the nth degree on Friday night when I saw it at Bourbon Classic.
That's right.
And
You have your hoodie on?
Oh, heck yeah.
he did. It was bright. It was not.
That's why I wear it, so you can't miss me.
Exactly. So you talked about the different classifications. You talked about corn whiskey, you talked about rye whiskey, and you talked about bourbon. So in the portfolio, obviously, Mellow Corn is the corn whiskey that's bottled and bond. Rittenhouse is the rye at bottled and bond. Is there's not another rye at bottled and bond in the Heaven Hill?
Not in our portfolio.
Yeah. And then, obviously, there's a slew of bourbons. Old Fitzgerald maybe get the most hype and press because it's a beautiful decanter. And then you have Evan Williams White Label. Let's see how far I can go. You got JTS Brown, J.W. Dant. Oh, gosh. I'm probably missing some now.
T.W. Samuels,
T.W.
which is Kentucky only.
Yeah.
And J.W. Dant and J.T.S. Brown are only in like 5 or 6 markets. Kentucky and Indiana are.
Oh, and then Heaven Hill bottled and bond.
Heaven Hill is a very important one.
Heaven Hill bottle and bond.
Yeah.
So we have 6 national bottle and bonds that will be on the shelf at all times. So that's not counting the JTS Brown. So you just mentioned Mellow Corn, Rittenhouse Rye, Evan Williams. Then you have Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond, Old Fitzgerald Bottle and Bond, and Henry McKenna Bottle and
Henry
Bond.
McKenna.
So those 6 are, and people have noticed, saying, "Oh, I guess Henry McKenna's not selling as good." I'm seeing it on my shelf all the time, and I'm like, "Yeah, you're seeing it on your shelf a lot of time, but it's not because it's not selling."
Yeah.
We increased our capacity. We put 4 new fermenters in 12 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're just now seeing that the fruits of that.
To catch up.
That's how long it takes. That's how large companies that are stockholder held don't make those kinds of decisions, right? They sell stuff off, get rid of this, move to cut this. We stay with it. That's the difference between a family-owned company and a stockholder held. Doesn't mean they're doing bad things. That's just the pressure they have for their business model.
Yeah.
They have advantages that we don't, because we're family owned, and who wouldn't want to work for Diageo, the world's largest spirits company based out of London, England, and work for the marketing department there and the brand team? That would be awesome to live in London, right?
Yeah.
And how are we going to lure people here to Bardstown and Louisville? Do we get the same? We get the same candidates?
Yeah.
No, but we get passionate candidates and people who want to be in this industry a long time. And You know, I've seen in other companies, you get brand managers come and go.
Mm-hmm.
We've had our same brand manager since I've been here, and she's been here 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really a difference and really cool. There's no good or there's no better.
Yeah.
But it's just a difference.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, you kind of forget about those. I don't think I've ever seen a T.W. Samuels bottled in bond. I don't think I've seen
It's
it.
only in a
It's in a jug.
175.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. That's
Is
why I'm
there-
not.
is there a
Plus, sometimes you gotta look down, Jake. You gotta look down.
Oh, trust me, I normally look
Everybody's
down.
always looking up, but sometimes you gotta look down.
No, looking down is smart.
It's like those cereal commercials in the 90s. You had to crouch down and look at the bottom shelf.
Yeah.
In a lot of those little regional brands, you know, we can't go back into time machines and make more whiskey.
Yeah.
So during COVID, when Evan Williams exploded, up 50% in sales, you know, because people were drinking at home and they were taking home handles of, you know, to enjoy cocktails and drink at home. Well, where are we going to get that extra 50% from?
Yeah.
So we can discontinue a size of JTS Brown or JW Dan. People aren't going to notice it as much, and we can rob Peter to pay Paul a little bit with
Yeah.
those regional brands.
For sure.
And of course, you always want to be. A friend of mine says you always want to be Paul.
Yeah.
Sounds
Never want
like
to
an
be
even
Peter.
trade, but Peter, you
He's
rob
always getting
Peter
robbed.
and
He's
you
always
pay
getting
Paul.
robbed.
I mean, how is that even?
Yeah. Peter's getting the short end of the stick for a very long time. Yeah.
If JTS Brown goes off the shelves, though, I'll be knocking on the door.
No, I don't think that's gonna happen.
I will say that to Scott's, you know, infinite wisdom, he met Max at an event a couple years ago, and he did pitch. I'll let you say it, but I saw it happening live in action. I could see Scott just really pitching this idea. And what idea did you pitch to Max?
Well, we were just talking about like bringing back brands and like making a big to do about it. And I was like, you know, one brand that's prime for this is JTS Brown. Like, let's, not that I want to get rid of the $15 bottle, but like maybe do a special edition bottling of JTS Brown, you know, special age statement or something like that. And I just told him that, and he's like,
Fast
you know
Eddie
what?
Felson. Yeah.
He's like, you know what? Just give me a call sometime. We'll talk. He hands me his card. I know he's like, I'm never gonna remember.
And he
this
loves talking about stuff like that. I love talking about stuff like that.
And the thing is, it's got to be a screw cap if it goes, you know, it goes that way, right? Because that's you got to be true to what the bottle is.
Well, that's what you're talking about tradition,
Exactly.
right? I mean, bottle and bond. We start really talking about bottle and bond. I mean, you hear about it when Bernie talks about it. He talks about it with such passion and such confidence because he understands tradition, right? I mean, the very first product that Heaven Hill Distillery put out was a bottled and bond. It was the very first product they barreled on. Let's see if I remember this. Was it December 13th, 1935, right?
That's it.
Friday the
Harold
13th.
Serial number 1.
Right. And then
Wow.
4 years later, you got your bottle of wine. So it's about tradition. And so when you start talking about brand innovation, you know, you look at Old Fitzgerald, right? You're going to keep those decanters. You look at Mellow Corn. That label hasn't changed since 1948 or something. 1945, right? So yeah, I mean, if you're going to do a special edition T.W. Samuels or something, you got to keep the screw cap. I completely agree with you. It's about tradition.
Give me a plastic screw. You know, so you've been to Revival, you
Yeah.
know, and which has now got one in E-Town, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
In the northern Kentucky, you go to Justin's House of Bourbon, or you go to Neat Bourbon Bar, or you go to Seven, has some vintage stuff in Bourbon's Bistro. And if you get one of those old, you know, from the 1950s or 60s, and if it's got a cork in it,
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
it's disintegrated, and it's also evaporated down past the shoulders.
For sure.
But a plastic screw cap, 100% every time, closes,
Yeah.
opens easy, closes nicely.
Oh yeah.
Give me a
Very little to
plastic
worry
screw cap. I'll take
Every
that
day.
over metal.
Oh,
Every
for sure.
Every day.
Well, you know, so you talk about that. My aunt, my wife's aunt, she had a Old Fitz Prime, like 12-year, like from the 80s.
Nice. Yeah.
And I went to pick it up, and it sat in the back of this cabinet. I'm like, that shouldn't be here because that bottle's stupid expensive. I pick it up, and no one had touched it. I think it sat there for probably 10 years. I pick it up, and the cork just dust. I didn't even
Yeah.
unscrew it. It's just
Sure.
shaking the bottle a little bit turned the
Yeah.
cork to dust
Yeah.
because they didn't like keep the cork damp, and
Yeah.
it was a damn shame because then I tried to try it, and I was like, it just tastes like cork.
Yeah, you got to filter it through some gym socks or something. Get the cork out of there.
The cleanest
The
gym.
cleanest gym
The
socks.
clean
yeah.
ones only.
Yeah. Cheesecloth might be better than gym socks. But I don't have cheesecloth, so gym socks it is. No, so that's great. But you talked about innovation in this space, we were joking about JTS Brown, but you all are continuing to innovate, and one of the brands in the Bottled and Bond lineup that continues to be loud is the Old Fitzgerald, and there was some breaking news at BourbonCon. Someone got us to see a picture, and it spreads like wildfire. And so, can you tell people a little bit about what's going to happen with in a line extension with Old Fitzgerald?
Yeah, so we have the Decanter series, which came out 6 years ago, something like that. People know these things better than I do because
Things come and go.
Time
we
flies.
have a lot of things in there. So, but that was supposed to go 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So two expressions a year, spring and the fall, just like to educate people too, and to say, look, it's got to be a spring season and a fall season. So, and then there was also a VBS, which was from the visitor center only. It was only a few of those. That's when we have a very few number of barrels.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't even get that product out to all the stores in Kentucky. So we usually just do that a visitor center thing. So that's 30 or 40 barrels. That's not enough to get around. But we had the Decanter series supposed to go because there were double-digit age statements for the most part, and then that's all we had in our inventory. But then Max Shapiro goes, "Wait a minute, this has been very successful, and I don't want it to go away." And then so we're going to keep it because we found out that people love the 8 and the 9-year-old too.
Yeah.
It didn't have to be a double digit as long as we. Tawny Godey and Chris Briney in our sensory department, they're amazing. And, we have the luxury of 2.1 million barrels.
Yeah.
So that's how we can find those really great tasting barrels from certain floors and certain areas that we know from our experience. And that's also how we can have JTS Brown and JW Dan, TW Samuels, and Evan Williams Bottled and Bond, all 4 years old, all from the same distillate.
Yeah.
But we can make some taste a little bit different because they come from different parts of the rick house, and there's subtle differences in there. So we found out that people like those, and then we went, with the success of Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond 7-year-old,
Yeah.
what if we had an Old Fitzgerald to match that?
Yeah.
And so that's how that came up to be.
Well, I mean,
It's brilliant.
sign me up for 7-year-old Bottled and Bond bourbon. I mean, doesn't take
Well,
a...
and don't forget this to kind of piggyback off when you were talking about cocktails earlier with these 100 proofers, right? Well, not even just with cocktails. I mean, think about how the bourbon tasting space has exploded,
Yeah.
right? 30 years ago, it was all about doing wine tastings, right? And even today, you ask your everyday person, wine tasting or bourbon tasting, they're like, you can do bourbon tastings? They don't even know, right? You do a flight of bourbons, but it's really hard to put those together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you look at our portfolio, we can give you a real straightforward tasting, and they're all evenly matched at 100 proof, and you can really see not just the different mash bills, but just like Bernie was saying, this is coming out of this warehouse, or this comes out of this warehouse, or this is a lower floor, this is a higher floor. Look how those things interact with the liquid, and look what the differences they bring.
Yeah.
Because you would think you're sitting there drinking the same proof all the way across, and you're getting something that's very the same every time. You're not. The massive amount of flavor discrepancy between these bottlings, I think, makes so much sense in terms of setting up some sort of tasting that you yourself can do. I mean, anybody can do it. You just go out to, like you said, look down, right? Look down, get the bottled and bonds. More and more places we're seeing are having bottled and bond sections.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about something like releasing now the wheated mash bill in a 7-year-old bottled and bond, nationally available, now you're really starting to build that tasting and that experience for yourself, for your friends, or your family, anywhere in the country. No matter where you are, you're going to be able to find a pretty healthy selection of 100 proof to put against each other.
Scott, I feel this is a Patreon thing coming up soon where we do a Heaven Hill lineup. We do mellow corn, we do Rittenhouse rye, and then we do the wheated mash bill and the bourbon mash bill. HH Reg, if Colin's listening.
HH Reg, yeah. HH
or
Reg.
Connor's listening to this, we're going to make sure that we're speaking his language. That'd be a fun tasting. I'm sure Adam or Bernie would be free to come talk.
My
Yeah, I
favorite
think we'll
tasting
make
is the
that,
bottle and
yeah.
bond
There we
tasting, because when I taste people, and we start with mellow corn,
Yeah.
and then we and have mellow corn, Evan Williams Bottle and Bond, and Rittenhouse Rye.
Yeah.
All same 3 ingredients.
Yep.
3 different classes of spirits: corn whiskey, bourbon whiskey, and rye whiskey.
Yeah.
all 4 years old, as Adam said, all 100 proof. So I'm not tasting a 3-year-old 80 against a 4-year-old 100. It's apple. It's truly apples to oranges, right?
Yeah.
So then there's the apples to orange. So and then when you taste those in the succession, not only do you now you can put into your own words and your own experience with your own palate and go, I know what the difference between corn whiskey, bourbon whiskey, and rye whiskey is, and I can tell you in my own words.
Yeah.
Where maybe 2 minutes ago you couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Then on top of it, you realize, well, wait a minute. Corn whiskey's our mellow corn's aged in a used barrel.
Yeah.
Most whiskeys in the world, Scotch, Irish, Japanese, Canadian, all aged in a one-cheese bourbon barrel.
Yeah.
So this brings the story of life. If I taste the mellow corn and the Evan Williams, to almost the same exact recipe, and it's 4% different, but still that's pretty close. What impact does a brand new barrel have versus a used barrel? All this in 3 little whiskeys we're tasting, right?
I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now you want to do apples to apples?
Mhm.
We're going to take Evan Williams bottle and bond, Heaven Hill bottle and bond, and Henry McKenna.
Yeah.
One's all exactly the same whiskey.
4, 7,
Exact
10.
One's 4, one's 7, one's 10. Wow. What 3 more years do and 3 more years do?
Wow.
Incredible. Then we're gonna be able to do the when the Heaven Hill Old Fitzgerald 7 comes out. Heaven Hill 7, Old Fitzgerald 7.
Yeah.
Great. Just and it's really cool.
The possibilities are endless, and now I'm excited.
So the last tasting I went to with Bernie was over in Indiana. I can't remember the name of the bar, but you also finished it with it was a brandy. But is that still
Oh yeah, well,
still
that was our Sacred Bond brandy. That was my little brainchild that I kept seeing Laird's apple brandy everywhere. But
But yeah.
unfortunately, it's still out there. You can still get Sacred Bond brandy, and so it's a small little segment. So hopefully we're not gonna we won't that won't go to the great liquor store in the sky. But it's
yeah,
really
but even-
it's unique.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to talk about
Yeah, we own Christian
versus-
Brothers brandy.
Yeah.
So I was like, how about a 4-year-old bottle of Bond brandy? You
Yeah.
know, so we already got the liquid, right?
Yeah. Might as well try it.
Yeah,
I mean,
and it's great.
come on, have fun with it, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, why not? Why not? You know, continue to experience. And I think that's really cool. And you all experiment too, right? You know, there could be an American single malt down the line. You've done malt whiskey before, so I mean, it's not like it's not been done. So I think that's what's cool is while you are a heritage brand, you've never stood still, right?
Sure.
And I think that's really important.
And some of our
That's really
innovations, which I haven't even talked about, that are bottle and bond. You know, we've had some Parkers that are bottle and bond. We had
Yeah.
the 24-year-old bottle and bond that was Parkers. We've had some William Heaven Hills that are visitor centers
This
only
past
that
William Heaven Hills
are a bottle and bond.
Yeah.
And so we don't even count those because I don't want to count the allocated ones.
Mm-hmm.
And we want our whiskeys to. It's fun to have allocated and hard to get in unicorns and all that, but that's not really our. We want to make the best bourbons and whiskeys we can, and make it available.
For sure.
Because that's one of our strengths is being one of the second largest holders of bourbon whiskey in the world.
Yeah.
Is using that advantage.
Well, I mean, go to Costco, get your 175 of Evan Williams White Label Bottle and Bond, $24.99.
Well, that's another great thing about where we excel, and we know, as a company, we know where we have to play, because a bar or restaurant is gonna. Are you gonna be able to use a $80 to $100 bottle of bottle and bond in your cocktail? No, because there's got to be meat left on the bone so that our distributor can sell it, and then they can sell it at a good price. So, I mean, how much is a bottle of Evan Williams on the shelf? I mean, I know, but
It's $19.99.
it's like and so for like a liter of it. If your bar is going to buy a liter of it at wholesale price, it's going to be about $16.
Yeah.
So, and how much you getting for a cocktail? $12, $10?
Yeah.
So that means that they can have profit on the second pour.
Yep.
And there's a lot of our competitors that are international, that have international brands and have the international marketing teams with those stuff, but you got to touch their bottle four times before you make money.
Yeah.
Well, with ours, you can touch it twice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one reason why Evan Williams is the #1 selling bourbon in New York and very big in San Francisco and Chicago, because we were in this conference room here. A bar this size in New York's $15,000 a month.
Yeah.
And so you got to be able to make money. And so we know when we think about how much it costs, I mean, we look at who's using it.
Yeah.
You're going to make cocktails at home. You're going to use Evan Williams Bottle and Bond. You're going to use Rittenhouse Rye, right?
Yeah.
And you got to be able to afford to.
Yeah.
Hey, when I call an old fashioned, it's always Rittenhouse Rye.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
There you go.
Gotta keep it simple. If they say they don't have Rittenhouse, and I say I don't want a cocktail. Just give me a little bit.
I don't want to be here.
I'm out. I'm leaving. See you later. No, man, but this is exciting, and I think people don't understand the passion behind Bottled and Bond. Scott and I jokingly talk about it. We are passionate about this 100 proof spirit because it is that gold standard of what whiskey, what bourbon should be. Or all whiskey should be, really, in all honesty. And I think that's what's really cool. I love the passion out of this. I love that you're training Adam to be, the next Padawan in all of this. And so, excited.
Well, I carry this around with me. This is kind of, throw that on. You hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is a 1897 silver dollar. Because the Bottle and Bond Act was passed March 3rd, 1897. So as we record this, next week, this Monday is March 3rd.
Yeah.
And I carry on with me because that's the very first consumer protection legislation in the history of the United States was the Bottle and Bond Act. Because people doctors were prescribing whiskey as medicine.
Yep.
And because of the unsafe ingredients, additives that people were putting in rectified whiskeys, it was making their patients even more sick. So they lobbied for and got a purity law. And so it's important, and then again, when you look at it and say, so it's the most restricted spirits on planet Earth. That's a big statement.
For sure.
But nothing comes close to it. Armagnacs, cognacs, tequilas, mezcals, they don't come close to the restrictions. And then I say it's the rarest. Well, wait a minute, you can get mellow, I can buy by the case. I can buy Evan Williams and Rittenhouse Rye, and now even Heaven Hill 7. How is it rare if I can get it every day? Hey, rare is rare.
Yeah.
So, again, I'm going to go back to 2005. 10 distilleries owned by 6 different companies. Today, there's in Kentucky over 100. Outside of Kentucky, there's not just 2, or if you want to count 4 with Jack and Dickel, there's 2,600.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody makes 4 different labels, and even small distilleries like Wilderness Trail and New Riff and Hard Truth and all that, they have more than 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Let's just give it 4. That means there's over 10,000 labels of American whiskey on the landscape. There's only around 100 total bottle and bonds in the world.
Wow.
That's rare. Out of 10,000, there's only 100. And then, in any given market, there's only around 20. In Kentucky, we have about 30 because some don't make it out, like JTS Brown and Dips. We have a little bit more.
Yeah.
So there's, out of 10,000 of something, there's only 20 of something. And we got 6 of them. We're a third of the entire thing, if you want to look at it that way. So that's an advantage that we have over our competitors.
Yeah.
And we have great competitors. So
For sure.
it's fun. It's fun to compete and be the underdog a little bit, right?
Yeah. Man, now I just want to go drink 100 proof whiskey.
Well, we got some right behind
Hey,
us.
we got some.
Dude,
We're not running out yet.
What a great idea.
They're staring at us.
What a great idea.
Well, we're going to have to close this podcast down and have a sip of bourbon before we leave here. But really, Bernie and Adam, thanks for making time with us ahead of Bottled and Bond Month here in March, and just really celebrating the true dedication of crafting spirits at Heaven Hill and for the consumer to enjoy, whether neat on a rock or in a cocktail. We really appreciate what you all do to spread the gospel of Bottled and Bond, and Heaven Hill. So really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Bourbon
Thank
Lens.
you.
And we'll catch you next time. Cheers.